right, welcome in. So today you are going to be learning about basic form number 1, which is slabs. There are going to be 2 other basic forms you're going to be learning about through this semester, which are pinch pots and coils, but we'll get to those another day. First things first, what you do need to know is slabs are essentially a flat piece of clay. There's lots of scenarios where you might be making your project and part of it, or even the majority of it, is best off by being formed with slabs. Some examples. In the past, we've had students make their own glaze palettes or paint palettes for ceramics. So what they did is they first rolled a slab, see, a flat piece of clay, and then they carved out in it to create areas where you can put the glaze. So that's one thing you can make with slabs. Another project students have done in the past with slabs is a doorways project. So there's so many different ways that you could create a doorway, what types of doorways, but this is just one of the many ways. Generally, you'd be rolling out a flat slab and then carving away and adding on clay to create more depth. Once you get really good at working with slabs, then you can move on to creating more complex forms with them, which again, we'll be talking about later this semester. Some of the more complex forms includes like a box, where you use several slabs to create a box form. And even a cup, where you take a slab, and there's a lot more to it than this, but you essentially wrap it in a cylinder to create a cup. So how can you make a slab? There's 3 main ways. You can either make a slab by hand, where you simply take some clay and you push it to make it flat. Whenever you make a slab by hand, it's gonna give your clay a more natural look. The reason it's going to give it a natural look is because our hands aren't perfectly flat, right? When we push on the clay, it's going to leave just small areas where it's higher or a little lower, and that's totally fine. And if you're looking for a natural look for your clay, that might be the way you want to go. The second common way that people like to make slabs is with our slab roller right here, or slab rolling table. This is a very valuable piece of equipment we have here in our ceramic studio. It gets a lot of use for sure. So what I love about it is it's relatively low tech. I'm not a super techie person, I'm not the best with it, but this thing is pretty foolproof. So if you feel like you aren't super techie either, then you're gonna love this machine. So how it works is essentially you literally just roll this captain's wheel, and this big metal pin is going to roll over your clay and flatten it out. Now there's a lot of little tips and tricks to make a perfect slab come out of this machine, but as far as operating it, that's all there is to it. So if you were to want to use the slab roller, first thing you're going to want to do is, as we learned in our last video, is you want to knead and wedge your clay. So you're going to knead and wedge your clay, then you're going to roll it into a ball-like shape. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I do recommend getting rid of any major cracks. And then, this part's very important for the slab roller, you're going to flatten your clay a little bit. The reason is our slab roller is really strong. However, if you leave your clay as a large ball of clay, it's going to put a lot of pressure on this roller. If it puts too much pressure on the roller, it could potentially break our slab roller. So if your clay is too thick, it could break our slab roller. And you don't want that, I don't want that, so make sure after you make your clay into a ball shape, you flatten it out. You're going to want to flatten it out more specifically to be about 1.5 inches thick. I'll show you what that looks like in a sec. So 1.5 inches thick is about this thick. The reason you don't want to flatten it out too much is if you flatten your clay out too much, then you're going to end up getting dents in your clay, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. So I got my 1.5 inch clay right over here in front of the slab roller. Safety rule, make sure your hands are off of the slab roller whenever you're using it. That goes for anyone else too. If there's someone else in the area, make sure their hands are not on the slab roller. This is a very heavy pin and it could get dangerous if you were to accidentally roll it over your hands. But all right, so you start rolling it out. You want to make sure that the canvas always ends up being above your clay as well as below your clay, which is a given. There's always going to be canvas below your clay. You just want to make sure it's above. Some people on accident will have this canvas down where you can see the metal roller and then they'll roll it. What happens, it's nothing terrible, but your clay is going to stick to the roller. So when you roll the roller back, it's just going to be glued to it. So you always want to make sure the canvas is above and below it. All right, so start rolling it out. You want to make sure you give consistent and slow pressure. You don't want to go fast. You don't want to go jagged, just slow and consistent. Make sure you get all the way over your clay or else it won't roll it out completely. All right, so then when you roll it back, you just want to make sure that you hold up the extra canvas. If you don't do that, then this roller is going to roll over on the canvas and create an extra layer. You don't want that to happen because what that'll cause is that'll cause a dent in your clay where it did roll over the canvas. So always be sure when you roll it back to hold up the excess canvas. Alrighty, so next we have our slab. Our slab is rolled out. See how it's nice and flat? This is probably about maybe 1/3 of an inch thickness. We can adjust the height of this slab roller, or we can adjust how thick it rolls. Again, it's a very low-tech solution. This canvas piece that is below my clay right now, it's just simply a thick board. And I can take out the thick board and change it out with a thinner board or an even thicker board, and that adjusts how high the base of this table is, which adjusts how thick the clay comes out. So a low-tech solution, but yes, we can change how thick these slab rollers roll out. All right, so as I was saying, I got my slab of clay. Next step you are going to do for every project, whenever anything comes out of the slab roller. You'll notice that it came out of the slab roller and it has a bit of like a canvas type texture. So it's not perfectly smooth, it's a little rough. So what I'm going to show you is how we smooth it out. You will always want to smooth out your slabs after they come out of the slab roller. The tool that you're going to want to use is a smooth rib tool. So the thing about the smooth rib tools is they can be a little sharp. The reason they're a little sharp is because most people don't notice that they're a little sharp. So if you're just kind of aware that these edges might be a little pokey, then you should be all right. So just try to not brace your hand against the edges and you should be good to go. All right, so you're gonna quite literally just run this across the surface of the clay, almost as if you're petting the clay in a strange way, I suppose. A lot of people make the mistake of kind of holding it completely upright and doing this. You're gonna get all these lines in the clay if you do that. So you wanna make sure that you start and you slowly glide in and you come up. For those of you guys that have ever like spray painted, it's a similar concept, right? You start light and then you get closer and a little heavier. So once you get the technique down, you can go a little faster. You can always kind of push the clay inwards. This helps to compress the clay and get all those clay particles smushed together like we mentioned in our kneading and wedging demo. So now you'll notice the clay is a lot smoother. You'll also notice something else too. You might notice this tiny little bubble right there underneath the clay. So you don't want to have air in your clay. Again, I know we haven't talked into detail about why that is yet, but just trust us, you don't want to have air in your clay. This is a little air bubble. So I'm looking around at my clay. I don't see any other air bubbles. I just see this one. If I saw a lot of air bubbles, then I would tell myself, okay, I have to knead and wedge, start from scratch, and then roll it. Since I just have this one air bubble, I'm going to show you guys a technique you can use if you just have maybe 1 or 2 air bubbles. You can quite literally extract them. So you find the air bubble, you poke something into it. It can be a toothpick, a paper clip, it could be whatever. Just poke into it. Sometimes the bubbles are way deeper under the clay, sometimes they're at the surface. This one was very much at the surface. I could tell because you can kind of feel when you hit air. It all of a sudden gets really easy to push the tool through. And then just kind of push all the clay towards that opening, and eventually it'll fill in that gap. You can continue to smooth it out, and our bubble is no more. So again, only do that technique if you have like 1 or 2 bubbles. If you have like more than that, then just knead and wedge, start from scratch. Okay, and I know earlier I mentioned that if your clay is too thin, then you might have issues rolling it through the slab roller. Let me show you guys what I mean by that. So if you push your clay too thin, in other words, if you push it way thinner than 1.5 inches, if you go to roll it through the slab roller, the roller might not even touch some areas of your clay because it's so thin. So what's going to result in that is, as I mentioned earlier, dents, or another phrase we could use for that would be fingerprints. So if you start out with your clay too thin before it goes in the roller, then you will have fingerprints when you roll it through the slab roller. So you can see all these dents are where the actual roller didn't even reach the clay to flatten it out. If that happens to you, it's not the end of the world. Just knead and wedge your clay and start from scratch. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to mention for your demo today is the third way that you can create a slab of clay. And this is with a rolling pin. So I'm going to try to knead and wedge this real quick. So a rolling pin is nice to use for rolling out slabs of clay, specifically if you want a very specific custom thickness for your clay. So, you know, if you want it to get really thin, let's say, let's just get a little bit of clay. You're going to do a much better job kneading and wedging than I just did. You get out your rolling pin, and just like you're making sugar cookies, you're going to start rolling out the clay. What's kind of nice about a rolling pin is it doesn't leave that canvasy texture you got to get rid of. You might notice though, it'll start getting kind of warped as you go, so every once in a while you might need to pick up the clay and turn it like 90 degrees. So now it's getting a lot thinner, and I have complete control over how thick I want it to get. And you can get clay really thin. There's so many different purposes for thin clay. Usually it's for decorative things. So here's my very thin piece of clay. Again, there's a little bit of a texture, not much. I would recommend still smoothing it out with a rib tool. It helps compress the clay and realign all those clay particles. So that is all I have for you guys on basic form number 1, which is slabs. When we return for our next demo, we will be talking about surface techniques 1 and 2, which is how to add and subtract clay. Thanks guys, see you next time.